Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on a story that perfectly captures the revolving door between government power and Silicon Valley money.
A former UK Chancellor, one of the most powerful finance ministers in the world, now sits inside OpenAI, and he's got a message for every nation on Earth: embrace our AI, or get left behind.
It's a story about influence, about access, and about how the people who once wrote the rules are now working for the companies those rules are supposed to govern. We're going deep tonight.
So grab a seat, because by the end of this broadcast, you'll see this story very differently than the headlines suggest. Let's get into it.
Our top story tonight comes from reporting by The Guardian. George Osborne, the former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man who once controlled Britain's entire fiscal policy, has issued what can only be described as a sales pitch dressed up as geopolitical advice.
That's right. Osborne, who is now roughly 2 months into his role as head of global affairs at OpenAI, the San Francisco-based AI company valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, says that countries which do not embrace powerful AI systems risk being, and I'm quoting here, weaker and poorer.
Let's pause on that for a moment, Alex, because the framing matters enormously. This isn't some neutral academic offering a measured policy analysis. This is a man who is being paid by OpenAI, a company that directly profits when governments buy into the idea that they must adopt AI or face decline. He is literally describing the product his employer sells.
Exactly. And Osborne used a very specific word that I think reveals the strategy here. He talked about FOMO, fear of missing out. That's not the language of sober policy analysis. That's the language of marketing. That's the language you use when you want someone to make a purchase decision based on anxiety rather than evidence.
According to The Guardian's reporting, Osborne is approximately 2 months into this position at OpenAI. So let's think about that timeline. He joins one of the most powerful AI companies on the planet, and within weeks, he's out in public making the case that entire nations will suffer if they don't get on board with the technology his company builds. That is an extraordinarily fast pivot from new hire to public evangelist.
And we need to talk about what OpenAI actually is right now. This is a company that has undergone a remarkable transformation. It started as a non-profit research lab, ostensibly dedicated to ensuring artificial intelligence benefits all of humanity. It is now a company that has raised enormous sums of private capital and is valued at around $500 billion. The non-profit mission and the profit motive are in direct tension, and hiring someone like Osborne is part of how you resolve that tension in favor of the money.
That's a critical point. Why does an AI company need a former chancellor? They don't need him to write code. They don't need him to train models. They need him because he has relationships with heads of state, finance ministers, and regulators around the world. He has a Rolodex that money can't buy, except, apparently, it can, because OpenAI bought it.
And this is part of a much larger pattern in the tech industry, what we might call the political capture strategy. You hire former government officials not because of their technical expertise, but because of their credibility, their connections, and their ability to walk into rooms that would otherwise be closed to corporate lobbyists. When George Osborne says nations need AI, it carries a different weight than when a Silicon Valley executive says the same thing.
Let's dig into the substance of his actual argument, though, because even setting aside the obvious conflict of interest, the claim deserves scrutiny. The idea that countries which don't embrace AI will be left behind sounds intuitive, but it's actually a very specific kind of argument. It assumes that the AI being built by companies like OpenAI is the AI that countries need. It conflates one company's products with an entire technological revolution.
Right. It's like if the CEO of a pharmaceutical company said countries that don't buy our drugs will have sicker populations. Well, maybe. But maybe the answer is better public health infrastructure, better nutrition, better sanitation. The framing excludes every alternative and presents one company's solution as the only path forward.
And there's a deeper issue here about the kind of AI development Osborne is promoting. OpenAI builds large, centralized AI systems that require massive computational resources, enormous datasets, and significant ongoing investment. When Osborne tells countries they need to embrace AI, he's specifically telling them they need to become customers of companies like OpenAI. He's not talking about countries developing their own domestic AI capabilities, training their own researchers, or building sovereign technology infrastructure.
That distinction is absolutely crucial, Maya, and it rarely gets made in these conversations. There's a world of difference between a country investing in AI education, research institutions, and homegrown technology, and a country signing contracts with American tech giants. Osborne's message conveniently points toward the latter.
Now let's talk about who benefits and who loses in this framing. The beneficiaries are obvious. OpenAI benefits when governments around the world feel pressure to adopt AI quickly. Speed benefits incumbents. If you're a country feeling FOMO, you're not going to spend 10 years building domestic capability. You're going to sign a deal with an existing provider. And right now, the existing providers are overwhelmingly American companies.
The losers are less obvious but more numerous. Developing nations that can't afford to be major AI customers get told they're falling behind, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Countries that might want to take a more cautious, regulated approach to AI deployment get told they're making a mistake. And citizens everywhere lose because the conversation gets framed around national competitiveness rather than around what's actually good for people.
There's also a labor dimension here that doesn't get enough attention. When we talk about countries embracing AI, we're often talking about automating work that people currently do. Osborne, when he was chancellor, oversaw austerity policies that cut public services and reduced the social safety net in Britain. Now he's promoting a technology that could displace workers on a massive scale. The question of what happens to those workers is conspicuously absent from his pitch.
And that brings us to the revolving door problem, which is really the heart of this story. George Osborne was chancellor from 2010 to 2016. During that time, he made decisions that shaped the regulatory environment for technology companies. He influenced tax policy, trade policy, and industrial strategy. Now he works for one of those technology companies. The knowledge he gained as a public servant, the relationships he built with public money, the credibility he earned in public office, all of that is now in service of a private corporation's bottom line.
This isn't unique to Osborne, of course. The technology industry has been on a hiring spree for former government officials across the globe. Former prime ministers, former regulators, former intelligence officials. The pattern is consistent. You serve in government, you build relationships and credibility, and then you cash in by bringing those assets to a company that needs political access.
And the thing that makes this particularly concerning in the AI space is the stakes involved. We're not talking about a company that makes widgets. We're talking about technology that could reshape economies, transform warfare, alter the nature of work, and change the relationship between citizens and their governments. The people making decisions about how that technology gets deployed should be accountable to the public, not to shareholders.
The Guardian's reporting highlights that Osborne is specifically in a global affairs role, which tells you everything about what his job actually is. He's not doing research. He's not building products. He's managing relationships with governments. His job is to make sure that when world leaders think about AI, they think about OpenAI, and they think favorably.
And this is happening against a backdrop of intense geopolitical competition around AI. The United States, China, the European Union, and others are all jockeying for position. Into that environment, Osborne drops the message that you're either with us or you're falling behind. It maps perfectly onto existing anxieties and channels them toward a very specific commercial outcome.
Let's also consider the timing. OpenAI has been aggressively expanding its government and enterprise business. They need regulatory environments that are favorable to rapid deployment. They need governments that see AI adoption as urgent rather than something to approach carefully. Osborne's public statements serve that agenda perfectly.
And there's an irony here that I think is worth noting. Osborne, when he was in government, was a champion of fiscal responsibility, of not spending money you don't have. Now he's telling countries they need to invest massively in AI or face decline. The fiscal conservative has become a cheerleader for massive technology spending, and it just so happens that his employer is one of the primary recipients of that spending.
The question that I keep coming back to is, where are the countervailing voices? When a former chancellor says embrace AI or fall behind, who is out there saying, actually, let's slow down, let's think about this, let's make sure we're making decisions based on evidence rather than fear? Those voices exist in academia, in civil society, in some corners of government, but they don't have the megaphone that a figure like Osborne has, and they certainly don't have the institutional backing of a $500 billion company.
That's the asymmetry that really defines this moment. The companies building AI have virtually unlimited resources to shape the narrative. They can hire former world leaders, fund research institutions, sponsor conferences, and place opinion pieces in major publications. The people raising concerns about AI safety, labor displacement, concentration of power, and democratic accountability are working with a fraction of those resources.
And when someone like Osborne uses the word FOMO to describe what countries should feel, he's being more honest than he perhaps intended. FOMO is an emotion. It's not a strategy. It's not a policy framework. It's a feeling of anxiety that drives impulsive decisions. And that is exactly what serves OpenAI's interests, governments making quick decisions driven by fear rather than careful, democratic deliberation about how these technologies should be developed and deployed.
Let's zoom out now and look at the bigger picture, because this Osborne story isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a pattern we've been tracking on this show for months. The consolidation of power in the AI industry is accelerating, and it's happening through multiple channels simultaneously.
You've got the technical channel, where a handful of companies control the most powerful AI models. You've got the financial channel, where those same companies are raising and spending capital at a scale that makes competition almost impossible. And now you've got the political channel, where former government officials are being recruited to ensure that regulation serves industry interests rather than public interests.
And these channels reinforce each other. Political access helps secure favorable regulation, which protects market position, which generates profits, which fund more political hiring, which secures more favorable regulation. It's a flywheel, and it's spinning faster every day.
The Osborne hire is a signal. It tells us that OpenAI is not just building technology. It is building a political machine. It is assembling the infrastructure of influence that will shape how governments around the world respond to AI for decades to come.
And the "embrace AI or fall behind" narrative is the engine of that machine. It creates urgency. It short-circuits deliberation. It frames caution as weakness and adoption as strength. And it conveniently positions companies like OpenAI as essential partners for any nation that wants to remain competitive.
What we'd like to see, and what we think the public deserves, is a much more honest conversation about these dynamics. When a former government official joins a tech company and then makes public claims about the necessity of that company's products, that conflict of interest should be front and center. Every time. Not buried in the 15th paragraph.
We'd also like to see more scrutiny of the adopt or decline framing itself. History is full of examples of countries that benefited from being early adopters of new technology, but it's also full of examples of countries that benefited from being thoughtful adopters, from learning from others' mistakes, from building domestic capacity rather than becoming dependent on foreign suppliers.
The choice is not simply between blind adoption and total rejection. There's a vast middle ground of careful, democratic, evidence-based technology policy. But that middle ground doesn't generate revenue for OpenAI, which is perhaps why their head of global affairs isn't talking about it.
And that brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of all AI governance debates right now. Who decides? Who decides how this technology gets developed? Who decides how it gets deployed? Who decides who benefits and who bears the costs? Right now, those decisions are being made primarily by a small number of companies and the former government officials they've hired to manage the politics.
The answer should be democratic. It should involve citizens, elected representatives, independent regulators, academics, civil society organizations, and yes, the technology companies too, but as one voice among many, not as the dominant voice shaping the conversation through the credibility of hired former officials.
So the next time you hear a former world leader say that your country needs to embrace AI or risk falling behind, ask yourself one question. Who's signing their paycheck? Because the answer to that question tells you a lot more about their message than the message itself ever will.
Follow the money, follow the influence, follow the revolving door. That's where the real story is. And that's what we'll keep covering here on Truth Report.
Before we go tonight, we want to leave you with this thought. Technology is not destiny. The choices about how AI gets developed, deployed, and governed are exactly that, choices. They are being made by people, and those people have interests, incentives, and agendas. Your job as a citizen is to understand those interests and to demand that your government makes decisions based on evidence and democratic values, not on FOMO manufactured by corporations.
We'll keep digging, we'll keep asking the hard questions, and we'll keep following the money wherever it leads. That's what Truth Report is about.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and we'll see you next time.
Good night, everyone.